Here's a map I've made of all the Country Ball plushies I've helped design so far, which by the way, Japan, China, and India are still for sale, but there's only like a couple days left. As you all know, these are only available for a limited time. I can never bring them back in this form. So of course, the first Country Ball plushie I made was Poland Ball. That's obvious. That was all the way back in April 2021. But you can't have a Poland without their threatening neighbors, so the next campaign brought Germany and Russia. Germany actually outsold Russia. I was a little surprised about that. Now, this was obviously back in 2021 before the chaos, so now this thing's just awkward. Everyone was asking me for a USA ball, so for my third campaign, we dropped that. I also dropped another one, though, that was just kind of for me. I don't know, I just wanted to make this. Now, originally, I actually wanted to give him a little nuke to hold, but, yeah, they didn't let me do that. To be fair, I was gonna actually have the USA hold a nuke too, but okay. The next drop was my first time ever having 3 in one campaign. We had the Commonwealth, the UK leading, then our neighbors to the north, Canada up here, and then finally Australia down in Oceania. And honestly, still to this day, I'm still shocked at how much the Canada ball outsold the British ball. I could have swore the UK ball was gonna be #1. It actually wasn't even close. Unfortunately, Australia got 3rd place, but they didn't do too bad either. Finally, the most recent drop that wasn't this one, I did Italy, France, and Ireland. To be honest, I don't even really know why I chose those 3. I mean, I just really wanted to do Italy and France, but I didn't know like a 3rd spot. I had a lot of choices, but I know a lot of people just really wanted Ireland, which is now actually pretty obvious since people got way more Irish balls than Italian balls. I mean, not way more, but a pretty good amount more. Then surprisingly, France is actually my most popular country ball to date. That was shocking. And like I said, we're about to find out exactly how good these guys do pretty soon as well. I don't want to give too many details away, but of course there's a lot of places I want to still hit. I would definitely like to hit the Scandinavian countries. Of course, Iberia, the lowlands, the Balkans, an African campaign, a Latin American campaign, and then of course I really just want to hit all the countries that aren't actually balls. That's high up on my priority list. Here's a chart showing the cost of Christmas around the world. This is based on US dollars for Christmas food, decorations, and of course gifts. So the cheapest place to have Christmas is actually in Uganda. I know where I'm visiting next December. You can celebrate this holiday here for only $60 US. Then we actually have India in 2nd place, only $139, which all things considered, that is still pretty cheap. I probably spent like easily over $1,000 this Christmas. Christmas parties can be expensive. There's actually a huge jump up after Fiji, Nigeria, Guatemala, and into Spain. So keep this outlier in mind. The Philippines is very high up, and you might not actually expect that until you realize the Philippines spend like 1/3 of their year celebrating Christmas. For 4 months long, this nation is always celebrating Christmas. It's safe to say the Philippines probably love Christmas the most. Luckily, it doesn't cost them the most. It doesn't cost the US the most either, though. We're only in 4th place on this chart. The 2 most expensive places on Earth to celebrate Christmas is Lebanon and Canada. I gotta admit, one is more surprising than the other. I guess that's what happens when you have what looks to be a literal Christmas tree on your flag. $1,000 is so much money for Christmas, though. A proposed map to change time zones in Europe. Now, the current time zone map looks very strange in this continent, all the way from the westernmost parts of Spain and Iberia to the easternmost parts of Poland. Even the most northern tip of Norway is included in this. For reference, if you overlay the United States on top of this continent, California here, which is where modern-day Spain would be, is about 2 hours behind Chicago, and this is where Poland is. But in this European situation, there is no time difference between this same distance. So that is exactly why this proposal has been made, and obviously the big difference here is the increase of 1 hour east of France and the lowlands. Also, they'd be grouping UK with France, which is not how it is right now. That's got to make people's lives riding through the channel even more complicated. Just geographically speaking, this does seem to make a little bit more sense here. There'd also be a Moscow time, which is 3 hours ahead of the UK, France, and the lowlands. I also like the idea of Portugal, Ireland, and Iceland being 1 hour behind. Keep in mind when looking at a globe, these places are actually pretty west, especially as far as Iceland goes. I mean, they're pretty much right here next to North America. Unfortunately, the only country that would have 2 time zones would be Greece here. Can't forget they have the island of Crete out here in the Mediterranean. Percentage of Americans who depend on cars to get to work. Every single one of these dark blue counties in the deep south mean 100% of the residents need a car to get to work. There's also a lot in West Texas as well, which if you know anything about West Texas, that's pretty understandable. So obviously if the state itself is pretty rural, it shouldn't be surprising that a lot of the residents need a car. So for example, Wyoming has some pretty high percentages, but surprisingly Montana has some really light colors up here. How exactly do you live in a state like this and not need a car? Oh, I'm forgetting about horses, aren't I? That, or maybe they ride the wild moose. I love how the top reply is literally the exact thing I was talking about. How is Montana so high? Because a lot of people are working from home there. So the South has 2 things working against it. Not only does it have a lot of car dependent infrastructure, but also not a whole lot of remote work workers as well. The top counties that need a car are from states like Kentucky, Texas, Mississippi, and then Georgia taking the first and second place spot. Of course, completely unsurprisingly, the place where you really do not need a car is New York City. I think a lot of people could have guessed that. I'm actually surprised it's this high. 7.6% of people still need a car to get to their work. I guess if you do live on the outer edges or you have like maybe a very different occupation. I just thought literally everyone there could use the public transit. Washington, D.C., which you can't see it on the map, also is pretty good for this. And then actually San Francisco, California. It helps that this county is actually so tiny though, I'm sure. Wait, I'm just now realizing if you're a farmer and live on your farm, you definitely don't need a car. Maybe that explains why some of these places aren't worse. Keep in mind you want to be included if you ride a bus or a bike. There's actually a lot of factors to consider here. Americans' opinion on Europe, or the percentage of Americans who have a positive view on each country. So according to this poll, less than 10% of Americans have a positive view on Russia. I wonder why. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum, over 70% of Americans like Italy, which is actually significantly higher than a lot of these other places. On another note, it seems like Americans would probably have a negative opinion of the place if they had never heard of it before. I'm guessing that's why all the city-states have red on them. Or in terms of the Balkans, maybe they just don't like the Balkans. Most Americans like Western Europe, except one outlier, Portugal. They really got to work on their PR, apparently. Only about 40% of US citizens like this country. I just really want to know what Americans were polled, like where they were from. I'm just trying to get some explanation for these results. Can't believe Switzerland scored higher than Germany and France, and Legoland has taken a pretty big L. Sweden and Norway has ranked above it. I'm convinced if Denmark legally changed their name to Legoland, their numbers would jump way up. I'm doing you guys a favor by calling you that. I'm sure heritage also has a lot to do with this. Britain, Ireland, and Italy all pretty high up, and a lot of Americans have some sort of connection to these places. I do think if just Americans have heard of you before, in the case of Greece, they're gonna like you. Then again, that's not always the case. We don't like Belarus. How did Croatia do better than Slovenia? Maybe it just sounds like too Russian to a lot of Americans. I bet you that's the thing. We're just scared of certain names. Without the existence of Italian cuisine, would they really have ranked this high? That's what I want to know. On a different note, a map of European countries with a higher social progress index than the US. And with that said, the US is being beaten by almost the entirety of Northern Europe, almost all of Western Europe, except once again, Portugal. I don't know what's going on here. As well as Italy, Austria, and Czechia. Even Estonia's got us beat. Then of course, it always comes back to the Cold War. There's literally a red wall just like blocking out all this. It always comes back to the Cold War. US is actually ranked 24th in this index. We're also being beat by places like Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and then unsurprisingly Canada. Eastern Europe is actually not doing bad compared to the rest of the world. They're just not better than the US. I mean, Poland's in 39th place. Slovenia is also getting there at 27th. They're about to pass us up. Wait, where does North Korea rank on this? I need the data. The top 10 Chinese companies, the number one being Tencent versus one tech giant. Apple has an over $2 trillion market cap. Now again, this is not the entire Chinese economy. This is just the top 10 companies, a lot of them being banks and whatever else. Oh, this thing behind Tencent is actually a beverage company. It's actually the largest in the world. Wow, I didn't even know that. It actually overtook Tencent this year by market capitalization. Oh, I actually might have tried this. I tried like $1,000, I don't know what that was. It like burned for days. I'm interested to see what this chart looks like in 5 years. Percentage of Europeans that agree it is a duty towards society to have children. It's actually not just the European continent. We have a couple African nations and Asia as well, which that's important to point out because Iraq is the top one on this map. I even expected them to be a little bit higher. This is a pretty bold statement though. It is your duty towards society. Bulgaria is actually next up to agree with this. We have the nation of Georgia, not the US state. What's going on in Montenegro? They're at 50%, whereas a lot of their neighbors are at like the 30s. The percentage gets lower and lower the more west you go. Oh, look at this in the Netherlands. 3%. Is that correct? And it's just very low overall in Northern Europe and the British Isles. Again, Portugal being the huge outlier. I think Portugal really is just Balkan at this point. These are all the autonomous areas in the continent of Europe. So some of the more famous examples come from the United Kingdom. We have Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. Oh, can't forget about the Isle of Man. We actually have a couple from Italy, specifically Sardinia, Sicily. I actually didn't even realize that so many of the Mediterranean islands have all this autonomy. We have this spot in Serbia and then like all of Bosnia. A lot of this region in Russia that's just north of the Caucasus Mountains. Oh yeah, and then there's the situation of Crimea. And then there's literally just all of Spain. Like I'm serious, it's all of it. And this is actually a big reason why Spain refuses to support a lot of the places that are trying to gain autonomy or their independence from other countries around the world. They can't really throw rocks in their glass house. Keep in mind, an autonomous region is an area of a country that has a degree of autonomy or pretty much freedom from an external authority, which actually there are several places around the world that at least have one of these areas in them. Like for example, the United States is included on this map because we have a lot of islands. Puerto Rico probably being the biggest example of them all, but also Guam and the US Virgin Islands. But wow, when you put it like that, how is Spain still surviving? I just want to know who's going to be the first nation on this map that's going to see some sort of independence at some point. The three major types of trenches. We have a typical trench to start things off, built under a battlefield with pretty much any material that can be found. Put some dirt that you dug up up above ground level, gives you a little bit more room to work with, keeps your head safe from snipers. And then you have a fire step, which you can sit on or stand over if you wanted to. Yeah, I mean, enemy lines are over there. There is the ideal trench, well constructed with also good drainage. It's kind of an important part that we're forgetting. Nobody wants trench foot. Oh, so probably the water's gonna go down into here. That way you don't have to step on it. That's nice. Dang, they live in rich down here in this trench. Finally, the wet soil trench, built mainly above ground level to avoid flooding. This is a lot of extra dirt that they stacked up here. There still seems to be still water this way though. I feel like the more dirt you have above ground level, the better. You probably don't actually want to build it that deep. Seems like some of these, yeah, just built a little bit too deep. I mean, because won't the water still come through below ground level? Well, this one isn't too bad. It's not that low. And then the fire step. Okay, that's always very important. Now just imagine being forced to live here for like 4 years. This is pretty much your life. And big thanks to my patrons. Drew, I'm stalking you and will kidnap you December 27th, 2022. DJ McSkillet.
aPhatNarwhal.
Drew's Argentinian
$20 is a
Bjarne
lottery.
Wildfang.
Bring back
Evan
Poland
Pryce.
ball.
GoodOldRyah.
Isaac Kilgore is
LuxembourgLover.
dead.
Noah Gamer.
Veiotic.
Bassall
Ortin
69.
5610.
Patrick.
Phresh
Allison.
Animations.
RyeThePie.
RyeThePie.
Scottish. If you hear this, I love you. The
Lithuanian.
Mexican
Commonwealth.
760.
And why am I doing this?